Thank you, Julie. Good morning. Thank you all for coming. And for those on Zoom, those who are here, have an extra treat. Help yourself to some chocolate that Tom has brought. Our speaker today is Dr. Thomas Pearson, and he's going to talk on the epidemiology of chocolate. Tom is a UF Emeritus Professor of Epidemiology and Medicine. He joined UF in 2012 as the Executive Vice President for Research and Education at the UF Health Science Center. As an undergraduate, he studied botany. Then he went on to earn his Doctor of Medicine, Master's in Public Health, and a PhD in Cardiovascular Epidemiology, all from Johns Hopkins University. He's board certified in internal medicine, preventive medicine, and clinical lipidology. He's the former director of the UF MD PhD program. That's where the MD students also do a PhD. And he served also as chair of the Department of Medicine at both Columbia University and the University of Rochester. He has served as a member and chair of the prestigious Institute of Medicine, the American Heart Association, and the American College of Cardiology. He has published extensively and lectured widely on cardiovascular disease and public policy in healthcare. Never abandoning his passion for the natural environment, he is an expert amateur ornithologist, a citrus farmer, and a connoisseur of wine. Tom, please welcome Tom.
Well, thank you very much, Pushpa. I don't know if the wine lecture has samples, however. Well, there certainly was a barrage of chocolates laid down before. I've got some more, but I think those of you who've been in academia, you've done a lot of teaching, et cetera, and you kind of go along and at some point you just want to develop a lecture that's fun. And that's what we're trying to do today. It also allowed me to talk about some of the things I did as the scientific advisor to the U.S. chocolate industry for about 8 years, where we advised them about some issues that they had to do so as to work out some of the details about the health and the practical aspects of chocolate as part of the American diet. So that's, let's see. Are we gonna get onto the right screen here? Okay. So can we get escape? Can we get? Okay, there you go. Okay. And so these are what we'd like to cover today, really to understand some of the unique aspects and composition of cacao, which is chocolate, as compared to other high-fat foods, and then relate these components to a variety of metabolic and behavioral outcomes that's associated with chocolate consumption, and then relate these unique components to really to where it could fit in terms of human health, both established and hypothetical. Okay. A lot of buttons back there. I didn't push them all. There you go. Okay. Now, my real goal is to provide you with some things for your cocktail parties. These are little factoids that you can share, and so those little tidbits that spice up one's knowledge base. And so there's 6 important questions I'm going to address in epidemiology today. You know, why is chocolate associated with Valentine's Day? You know, why are chocolates for sale at the checkout counters, gas stations, and Starbucks? You go out and you check out, there's rolled chocolates there at the checkout counter at the grocery store. Why do Americans eat chocolate bars and Europeans eat bonbons. How did chocolate help America win World War II? Small question. Is the consumption of chocolate associated with harm, health, or neither? And can regular chocolate consumption be part of a health promoting diet? So those are what we're going to cover today. So chocolate is, of course, from the plant Theobroma cacao. And this is, of course, from Linnaeus, as back in the 1700s, I think. And it comes from Theo, God, and broma, which is food. And so this is literally, genus and species, is the food of the gods. So when you call it the food of the gods, you're not embellishing anything. You're just being botanically correct. And so this is our gift from Mesoamerica, from Central and South America. And there are very well documented uses of cacao in the Olmec, Mayan, and Aztec traditions. And here's a stone carving. I believe this is Olmec, and there's a cacao pod there in the archaeological dig. And so the history of chocolate was at least to 1400 BC, probably before that. The theobromine residues are found in a variety of Olmec, Mayan, and Aztec pottery, so it's clearly used. Actually, if you look at the people with the bragging rights, it's the Ecuadorians now say that they are the developers of the first and the best chocolates. Seems to be a little bit of jockeying around. Here's some pictures on royal burial pottery discussing the pot of kaku, which is their word for cacao. Right. Okay. And that will work over here. Okay. So this was used in religious ceremonies, and I'll talk about that in a minute, how it was used. But it was really felt to be a gift from the gods, the Ikechua, the cacao god, and so the Mayans used it as currency, and they ground up a paste, very bitter paste that we use in religious ceremonies and feasts, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And the paste was then taken up to water to make a frothy drink, cacahuaytl, otherwise known as bitter water. The Aztecs, they're more aggressive neighbors associated with cacao with their god, Quetzalcoatl. And the beans were used for currency for tax collection, and only old beans were used for drinks because it was like eating quarters, I guess. And only royalty were allowed to drink chocolate. So this was really elevated to a very prestigious, and this is here is from I think some pottery talking about the pouring of the chocolate as part of a ceremony. So here's the cacao, and I'm going to credit my wife, Joyce, she's my AV team here. And I believe these are from Belize. So I wasn't even with her when she was taking these chocolate. But anyway, there's these odd pods that just come out of the side of the trees. And so if you're in the tropics, go look for them. It's really quite, and they turn these bright colors. And when you cut them open, what you see is this, there's this white pithy stuff. And then in it are the dark beans, which of course is what you're after. And these beans then can be heated, and so that their covering comes off. And here they are over a fire, and so they're roasted. Obviously, commercially, this is done in mass quantities. This was in a local family site. And this is basically the same way dating back to 1400 BC. And here's a lady, obviously working with her cacao beans and mashing them into a paste. And it was this paste which was the bitter drink that the Mayans and the Aztecs used for their religious ceremonies. Here we are. Also, you mix it with a variety of things. We obviously mix it with sugar and dairy, milk chocolate. But apparently other societies use chilies, corn, etc., as a kind of a carrier for the cacao. So, and I'm going to get into a little biochemistry later, but to pull all this together, the cacao was used in religious ceremonies because basically it would be drunk very strong concentrations in large quantities, and basically would cause people to hallucinate, to see God, Theo Broma, okay? So that was the other thought that maybe bringing up the Theobroma might also have had some effect of Linnaeus choosing those words. Anyway, it has been thought to be associated with, and I was congratulating the organizers to lay down this barrage of chocolate before the talk, because this is associated with arousal, endurance, and physical prowess. I'm not going to ask you to do anything physically, but the arousal endurance would be good. And more interesting, but more controversial, is also its aphrodisiac properties. It's well described that Montezuma drank a full goblet of this before entering his harem. The French felt it necessary to forbid monks from drinking chocolate, so they didn't, fall off the wagon, I guess. Madame de Berry, French courtier, gave it to her suitors. Casanova used it, and physicians in the 1800s prescribed it to lovelorn men. So you come up with a tremendous history that I don't think is just totally fictitious. There must be something behind there. But just to say is that the current evidence is inconclusive, even though it would appear that the war is already won in terms of using this for a variety of things like Valentine's Day, okay? So, but it is a stimulant beverage preceding coffee and tea in Europe. And there's this woodcut here. So clearly in the 17 and 1800s, 16 and 1700s, the Europeans felt unstimulated. So they had to go out and find things that would perk them up. And they went to the New World, to Mesoamerica, and got cacao. They went to China and got tea. And they went to Arabia and got coffee. And those are all the stimulant beverages we have. And they are all developed in Europe, obviously, very early on because of their stimulant qualities. And chocolate was certainly there. So this is a stimulant beverage preceding coffee and tea in Europe. And it was brought to Spain early on by Columbus and Cortez and some of the first boats back. So it really has a long history. So our job as epidemiologists, as food scientists, is say, well, how does that work? Is this all just kind of tradition and myth, or is there really something to this? It turns out that coffee, as a tropical bean, has a lot of stuff in it of quite great metabolic interest. First of all, it's full of methyl xanthines, and this includes theobromines. So a dark chocolate 50-gram bar has 250 milligrams. It's a very high dose of theobromine. I'm going to talk about theobromine in a minute. It also has a lot of caffeine. I'm going to talk about this anandamide, which is known to have psychotropic properties. The cannabinoid receptor part of the brain for you neuroscientists. Phenylethylamine is a CNS stimulant and mood elevator. It's also present. Phenylalanine is an amino acid and it has also a lot of interesting minerals, including magnesium. So it's actually quite from a nutritional standpoint, quite an interesting thing. And just to point a little bit about now, theobromine has no bromine. Okay, the molecule bromine. You would think theobromine would have bromine. No, I'm not sure that Linnaeus knew about bromine. So the name is derived from the cacao genus Theobroma, not vice versa. So the cacao genus Theobroma, when this compound was identified, was named for the chocolate rather than the other way around. It's an alkaloid, nitrogen pervading compound. Again, no bromine. And a cacao powder is 2 to 10% bromine by weight. So it really is concentrated cacao. Your powder is loaded with this stuff. And consequently, 1 ounce of dark chocolate contains about 200 milligrams of this compound. And it's might also, just by comparison, 1 ounce of milk chocolate has about 1/3 of that. So the dark chocolate, this is your whammy. All right, this is the good stuff. Okay, in terms of not just no fat raising. I'll get to that in a minute, but also by its contents. So this is just some fancy biochemistry, but it's been worked out. When you come up with an association, the next thing that the scientist says, well, how does that work? Because if you can't find the mechanism, we're all very suspicious that this is actually real. In fact, this is a competitive, non-selective inhibitor of a major enzyme system, which prevents the deactivation of some of the things that stimulate our nerves, cyclic AMP. And it also has a variety of other things that provided a stimulant effect. So I guess the message is that this has been worked out in terms of understanding what the biochemistry is to support some of these myths about this compound. So here we are with caffeine, and caffeine, which you're all aware of, is in coffee, and which is also a tropical bean, and it is metabolized down to theobromine, as well as several other methylxanthines. So this is the whole family, and so theobromine accounts for some of the stimulant effects of caffeine as well. With chocolate, you get the theobromine direct. Okay, so that's how it works. And so again, pure cacao powder contains a tremendous amount of theobromine. Baking chocolate, dark chocolate, a Mars Twix bar, and interestingly, white chocolate doesn't have it. So if you're having a reaction to chocolate, try some white chocolate if you can still have that creaminess. And I'm not sure I can share with you why that is, but that's what the food analysts say. So this is anandamide. This is derived from the Sanskrit word for joy, bliss, and delight. So that'd be a nice thing to have some of. And again, it's a long chain fatty acid. Essential fatty acid means it only can be found in the diet. And so it is a source of this. And it's a neurotransmitter. The cannabinoid receptors, for which cannabis is related, mediates this. And it regulates feeding and exercise behavior. It's thought to be the mediator for the runner's high. We have any runners here that need to go out, and after you run, you're buzzed up, and the next time when you don't go run, you're miserable because you need that buzz. Well, this is the one, and obviously it's the generation of motivation and pleasure. And so it's present in chocolate at certainly a measurable amount. And then finally, this phenylethylamine is also a neurotransmitter. Chocolate is the dietary source, metabolized in the small intestine. It's not clear if dietary chocolate could supplement endogenous sources, but it's certainly one in there. And I think that's still being worked out in terms of what that is. So there's some other micronutrients in chocolate. These manganese, copper, and magnesium. These ones up top here are probably some of the more unusual ones where you may not have some of the sources in your diet. Again, other things in dark chocolate. So there's a very interesting nutritional component here. Now, what about chocolate craving? And of course, I might say that the US chocolate industry, you'll be pleased to hear, knows a lot about this subject, okay? Probably has funded some of the research, as a matter of fact. The data show that women crave chocolate, men less so. You could do that objectively. And chocolate is among the most craved foods for women in studies from UK, Canada, and the United States. So these are British kind of countries. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So the craving for sweets is associated with the perimenstrual period and is associated and is considered to be a symptom of premenstrual dysphoric disorder. Obviously, a variety of mood and other issues that occur around the time of menses in some women. And part of that syndrome, in terms of if you were to ask a woman if she has a syndrome, one of the questions you would ask is, do you have a craving, food craving at that time? And that would be part of the syndrome. And as it turns out, is that chocolate is the only sweet craved more at the menses than other times of the menstrual cycle. So there's some objective evidence to suggest that whatever the compounds are in there, they affect people. And it looks like they affect women, particularly around the time of some of the hormonal cycling. So here's a cross-sectional survey of a craving questionnaire among 95 US university students, 188 Spanish students. And the cravings for chocolate during the menstrual cycle were more common in the American versus the Spanish women. And chocolate craving occurred at a particular point in the menstrual cycle in 60% of women, but only 24% of Spanish women. So there's a suggestion that chocolate craving might have a cultural rather than a physiologic basis. So the point is you can study all these things and try to understand what's really going on as an epidemiologist and a food scientist. Now, there was one thing that is not in question, and that is don't give phyto chocolate. Overdoses in mammals varies widely, but the dogs are the most common. And the reason for that is they metabolize theobromine much more slowly than humans. We burn it up, pass it along. The dogs keep it up, and they get to an overdose. And there's a variety of things here about the biological half-life of the theobromine. Is that half of it's taken in is still there in 17 hours later. So if you have a large dose, you got a real problem that dog's going to have that overdose for a long time. And 0.02 ounce per pound of dog's body weight of baker's chocolate causes symptoms. 1 ounce of milk chocolate per pound is probably a lethal dose in dogs. So this is something that keep phyto while you're baking cookies out in the backyard. Okay. And of course, there's a whole variety of symptoms, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, but what gets them is cardiac and neurologic and internal bleeding. So there's no question about that at all. Now, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about some of the studies of chocolate. And we all like to stand on the shoulders of those people who came before. And this is a professor from the University of Minnesota, Ansel Keys, who, and here's his picture. He got a PhD in 1930 as an oceanographer, biologist. And he was appointed in 1937 to teach physiology at the University of Minnesota. And he founded the Laboratory of Physiologic Hygiene. I had not met, he was very senior by the time I came along, but I had been to his laboratory. It was in the basement of the University of Minnesota football stadium. So you go to the football stadium and you know what's going on here. And here was this wonderful laboratory for human physiology. Well, the World War II came along and everybody got jobs. And he was assigned to the Army Quartermaster Corps to develop a portable and perishable ration that would provide calories to sustain soldiers in the field for up to 2 weeks. Okay, this was a challenge. First thing he did is went down to Chicago and requisitioned all of the Cracker Jack boxes. Remember those things with the wax on them, you know? And they were virtually impermeable, so they could go out and sit in somebody's backpack as they jumped out of airplanes and do well. And his chore was to get 3,200 calories per day from hard biscuits, dry sausage, hard candy, and he chose chocolate bars as one of, I mean, he only had a very few foods he could put in to that pack to keep a paratrooper alive, and he chose chocolate. Now, just to say is part of the punchline is he developed something called K rations. And to this day, it's purportedly named after Keys. So the K rations was Ansel Keys. And here it is, quite an interesting assortment. So here's these biscuits. There's some hard sausage. I think there's maybe some tinned meat. Unfortunately, there's 4 cigarettes. Again, in every bag. This is some citrus juice. And here's your 8 bars of chocolate. It had to be developed so that they could go out into field conditions. And this was all put into this box that was then covered with wax. And so every GI since World War II obviously is known for this. So there's the D-ration chocolate bar were developed by this, and this is where some names come up. And this was developed by Hershey Foods, and they were given really the coordinating to develop foods, develop chocolate as part of the K rations as required by Keys. And what they needed to have is a 4-ounce, high in energy, able to withstand high temperatures and taste better than a boiled potato. A high challenge to anyone. And so the ingredients were chocolate, sugar, oat flour, cacao, skim milk, flavoring, 600 calories per bar, 3 bars a day, and was heat resistant to 120 degrees. So that's what he did. Well, there are a few bugs to be worked out. The initial bars, and here they are. It looks like something you'd tile your floor with, actually. They were there, kind of this reddish thing. And so it's the field ration D. And then they were put into this package, which was, of course, the K rations. Well, people didn't like it. They called it Hitler's secret weapon. It was difficult and hard to choose. So I guess if you were starving in a foxhole, you looked at this differently. But the initial results were not good. So in 1943, the Army approached Hershey to produce chocolate bars with improved flavor that could still withstand that heat. Now remember, in Desert Storm, you'll recall there's another set of bars developed by Hershey's for the same thing with even more heat resistant. So they've been at this for a long time. So by 1945, the tropical bar replaced the D rations, and this looked much more like a a normal chocolate bar. It was still difficult to chew and appealing. There's multiple stories, including from my wife's father, about pawning these off or trading them with unsuspected Allied troops for something that was actually useful. However, it was the only ration that dysentery patients could tolerate. I never quite understood how a chocolate bar could keep you from the trots, but another interesting aspect. And again, in 1957, they removed some of the other things, and you replaced cocoa powder with cocoa fat and improved this. So here's the tropical bar, and what it looked like. Now, so Hershey, the rise of Hershey, and if you go to Pennsylvania, we all know Hershey. It's a major, I was a consultant to Hershey. It was, all of Hershey, Pennsylvania was owned by Hershey Foods, Milton Hershey. It was a company town in the strictest term, and a wonderful place. And so I've had absolutely ultimate respect for this company. It's now been much more corporate, et cetera. But so they've really been making chocolate bars since World War I. For World War II, 3 billion D-ration chocolate and tropical bars were produced. And what Hershey did was provided chocolate, and then they sent it out to all these other companies to make a variety of kinds of bars. But they were the core of all of this. At the variety of places, multiple times during the war, there was a Army Navy E Award for Excellence 5 times every year during World War II. And US propaganda said Allied nations would win the war because of democratic institutions, but also because of the productivity of the US economy and especially its agriculture. And so American troops had something that would keep them going, maybe less so than our adversaries, and chocolate bars were there. So Hershey and the chocolate bar became an American icon. And so we eat chocolate bars, and the Europeans eat bonbons, okay? And so it comes from a historical basis for that, which you might never have thought about. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about Dr. Keyes here, an interesting chap. And during the war, he did a variety of experiments on starvation. And he found a group of people who would do anything. And they were Minnesota Lutheran ministers who didn't want to fight, but would do anything else. So whenever he told them to do, no matter how, we would never get away with this, probably these days. But he had these starvation experiments that were done on these conscientious objectors, which provided a lot of information about calorie protein deprivation. It was very useful for medicine. But the other thing he's really famous for is this 7-country study. And he got the idea is that we should look at countries from all different parts of the world and see their heart disease rates and see how it was related to the diet. And he came up with this diet heart lipid hypothesis to saying the fats that people eat in their various cultures really were a major determinant of why Europe and America had high heart disease rates in places like Crete and Italy and Spain had less so. And so it was, and the basis for this is that all fats are not the same. Okay, there's a variety of different kinds of fatty acids, and that saturated fats in meat and milk were harmful, and unsaturated fats in vegetable oils were healthy. And this is the beginning of what you see every day in your grocery store with the oils and things you buy, talking about this. And so he's famous enough that certainly I've used in my research the Keyes equation, which relates the change in blood cholesterol to the change in saturated fat minus the change in polyunsaturated fat plus a change in dietary cholesterol. I don't want to get into the mathematics of this, But the point is, he put into a kind of a useful equation about if you changed your diet to one fat to the next, what you could expect the serum cholesterol to do. And this is held up pretty well with time, with the exception of stearic acid, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Okay, stearic acid is a very interesting fatty acid. I'll show you the pictures in a moment, but it's saturated 18 carbon. It's an 18 carbon chain, 18 carbons. And it's a major fatty acid in chocolate. Its saturated fats are 57 to 64% of coffee and chocolate and cocoa butter, but stearic acid is by far the most of that, whereas palmitic acid, which is milk fat, is less so. And so it's one of these foods in which the major fatty acid is stearic acid. It also has a lot of oleic acid. This is olive oil, the oleic acid. So it has a lot of stearic acid and a lot of oleic acid. And this is the reason why this has a high melting point. Okay, what you want is something that melts in your mouth at 98.6 and not in your hand at 76 or on your plate, okay? So have you ever taken a nice sip of corn oil? Not so good. And so the chocolate has that melt in your mouth flavor. And as you maybe want to resample some of the things you had, it'll hit the tongue, it'll start to, it'll literally melt. And that melt would then obviously coat your tongue and give you this wonderful taste bud experience. So that's part of the, there was a professor at Penn State. I wanted her job. I'm just going to quit. I'm going to go do this. She was the professor of hedonics. Okay. And hedonics is a person who studies the pleasures of food. What a job, you know? So there is some science with this, but again, this is the reason that it melts in your mouth. And again, chocolate has the highest content of stearic acid of almost of any food in terms of its, but it's not a major source because people really don't eat as much chocolate compared to, you know, meat and vegetables, etc. However, it does not appear, I'm going to show you a little bit about this, it does not appear to raise serum total or LDL cholesterol, and there's over 60 feeding studies showing that. Okay, this is not just one rogue industry-supported study. This is quite a literature. So here we are with stearic acid, this 18 chain. Here's olive oil. You got this monounsaturated fat. Here's polyunsaturated fats. And again, these are both essential. These are both that they have to come from the diet. So stearic acid is a saturated fat, but the question is, does it act like the other saturated fats that we know are bad for you? And again, candy down here, there is a contribution to intake, but stearic acid comes from a lot of other places. Okay, that's the point. And there's some meat and cheese, and so, but it is by content the highest in chocolate. And just to say that what effects of the various fatty acids are, these are the various saturated fats. You can see 12 carbon, 14 carbon, 16 carbon saturated fats. They raise the total cholesterol, the LDL cholesterol, and to some extent the good cholesterol. Here you have this trans fat. I think you all heard of trans fat. They created by processing of polyunsaturated fats to curve the molecule over. These are trans fats, and these are particularly a problem because they raise total LDL cholesterol and they lower your good cholesterol. So that's why we in health are really interested in reducing the trans fat. But here we are, stearic acid. And stearic acid by itself actually lowers LDL in total cholesterol. It actually raises HDL, like olive oil and other polyunsaturated fats. So this is the science behind what's in chocolate and why chocolate might be a good thing for the American diet. So what we have now is a problem, and that is the inclusion of dietary fatty acids in the wrong categories. Stearic acid is listed as a saturated fat, but does not raise cholesterol. Okay. Hershey bar. And this has 23% of per serving is saturated fat. And that's by far the most. And what we know that half of that saturated fat doesn't raise your cholesterol. So stearic acid, despite the science, and this is what I was working on for the chocolate industry, the stearic acid is listed as a saturated fat, but it doesn't raise cholesterol. So it's called a villain. It doesn't do villainous things. And and sometimes it's even replaced by C18 trans, that's trans fatty acid. This is a monounsaturated fat, which is called to be okay, but it raises LDL cholesterol and lowers HDL even more. So our point was the food label and the advisements that do when people read a food label should be accurate to science. They still aren't. They still aren't. We raised this issue years ago. So the recent nutrition aid, we were able to get trans fat on there, but it continues to group stearic acid, etc. So just you know. So one of the pleasures I had with this was to work with a couple of research groups, one at the University of Texas and Southwestern Health Science Center in Dallas, but mostly with a group from Penn State. Now you can imagine the State University of Pennsylvania having a slight interest in chocolate, with Hershey, hour and a half down the road. And so this is Penny Chris Etherton, a good friend. We worked together for many years. And so this is a very complicated experiment, but this dietary, the other thing was, this was all done on the State College campus. I've done clinical trials my whole career. And the biggest challenge is always recruiting subjects. Recruiting studies for chocolate studies was not a problem. It's more of an issue of crowd control. This barrage of students coming in and say, "You're going to feed me chocolate for 6 weeks?" And So anyway, but just to move along here, what they had was one set of experiments. Anybody guess what the high carbohydrate snack was in Pennsylvania? So the high non-chocolate, high carbohydrate snack. Pretzels, good one. Of course, pretzels. So yes, it was pretzels. And so it was pretzels versus milk chocolate bar. And they had this experiment, and then they switched them. And we had the same people, but on the other arms here. So this is a very strong study design, et cetera. And it's amazing when you can get 100% compliance. And this is what happened was, here we have this washout period, and then the experimental diet versus the washout diet. And what you had was comparing the milk chocolate with the carbohydrates. There was a slightly higher total cholesterol, very little difference in LDL, and a lot of the total cholesterol difference was that the good cholesterol was increased on the high chocolate diet, whereas it wasn't on the high carbohydrate diet. So a lot of the total cholesterol was actually due to an increase in good cholesterol. So certainly a suggestion. Again, we have 60 short-term feeding studies. Again, no deleterious effects on the lipids, beneficial neutral results on a lot of other stuff. And again, this is also favored with observational epidemiology studies, 11 large studies suggesting about a 19% risk. And this was dealing with some of the other parts of chocolate, flavonoids. And so these are just some of the studies. So a relative risk of 1 is no risk. And if it's less than 1, like 0.86, 0.73, 0.61, these are all studies that suggest that people on chocolate had a lower risk. The more chocolate you had was a lower risk rather than a higher risk. So these large, you can see the large number of people in these studies. One of the more recent things, I'm just going to finish up with this, is that there's something else in chocolate than just the stearic acid. And that's a whole family of compounds called flavonoids. And this is just a lot of fancy biochemistry. But these are ring structures. And the flavonoid that's most common is something called flavanol. This is a group that looks like, of compounds that looks like it has cardioprotective activities. And so if you look at the content of flavanols, this is per 100 kilocalories per 100 grams, you can see that milk chocolate and dark chocolate compare very favorably to other beverages and snacks, and really substantial amounts as a source of flavanols for the diet. And so there hadn't been any really large trials looking at this. This is a study from Harvard. And so this was the Cosmos study. Women greater than 65, men greater than 60 enrolled in ongoing studies. Does that sound like a group of interest to you? Yeah. So this was actually a group of, in the more elderly group, a very fancy design, cacao extract, Centrum Silver. Anybody on Centrum Silver? Okay, this is, and then both or neither. And the extract they used was very high in bioactive flavanols. And this was the initial study, started in 2018, took several years to come out. This is 2022. And what this study, again, 21,000 participants, the intervention I mentioned, and basically the total cardiovascular extract was just barely not significant. Total cardiovascular was significant, and the results for cardiovascular death in the cacao extract was highly significant, with about a 27% reduction in cardiovascular death in the group randomized to cacao extract. So just a couple of conclusions. Theobromine, and to a lesser extent, caffeine content in chocolate are biologically plausible mechanisms for the stimulant craving and possibly aphrodisiac effects on persons consuming chocolate. Dogs, cats, and other pets should not eat chocolate. The relatively high content of stearic acid in chocolate is the reason for its melting point just below body temperature, resulting in the smooth mouthfeel. Stearic acid does not raise cholesterol like the other saturated fats. Cardiovascular risk reduction in chocolate might be further explained by high concentrations of flavonoids and other compounds in the chocolate, and that while a full-fat, calorie-dense food, can easily be incorporated into a healthy diet, and therefore Linnaeus was right. Theobroma cacao remains the food of the gods. Thank you. And there are more chocolates.
Thank you. Thank you for this wonderful talk. Questions? I'm sure there are many questions.
There sound and look like a lot of similarities between chocolate and coffee. Can you compare them pharmacologically and botanically?
Well, that would be on the kind of micronutrient side. Of course, coffee is a hard bean. Doesn't have much, I mean, there's some fat. You can feel the fat in the coffee maker, etc. But it doesn't add to calories. You don't get a lot of calories out of a cup of black coffee. And so it's this area with the caffeine and theobromine things. And in that instance, they are similar, particularly if you think that caffeine actually is broken down to theobromine as part of the way it works. So you're right. And so the question is, if you take your double thing of coffee and a big thing of chocolate and eat them together, you better get something to hang on to, because you're going to be, you're going to be stimulated, shall we say. But so there are some comments, and isn't it interesting that these are all both tropical oriented, and you had to go to the New World to find these.
Look similar.
Yeah, well, yeah, the chocolate's bigger and softer, but yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a dark chocolate addict. And could you discuss, I know, could you please discuss the difference between the dark and white dark and milk chocolate?
Yes, and that has to do with the addition of milk fat to the chocolate. Okay, yeah, okay. Milk and the milk fat. And so the chocolate has this favorable fatty acid composition. The milk chocolate, and there's very serious description of what these are defined as. But the milk chocolate, as it's defined, has a certain amount of milk in it. And that milk, in terms of putting into the total fat content, still adds fat. But the major fat in milk chocolate is palmitic acid. And that raises cholesterol.
So the dark chocolate is better.
Oh, absolutely. And the studies all show that. And you could, yeah. And so but it has to do with, and also you'd be diluting all these other nice, interesting things. A lot of these flavanols and stuff would not be in milk. But there's some other good things in milk, calcium and protein and a variety of things. So I guess it depends on what you want to do. But in terms of if you want to find a healthy addition to your diet, it would be much more likely to occur with dark chocolate than with milk chocolate.
Yeah, that's why it was a little surprising to me that in that study, the crossover study, they used milk chocolate.
Mhm.
So really, the benefits would have been more pronounced had they used
It's a good
dark
point.
chocolate
You're right.
rather than
Yeah.
milk chocolate.
Yeah, even
Like
with
that. Yeah.
it was still
Right,
Yeah.
right.
they were trying to do a kind of a market,
Market
and
theory
this was before the dark chocolate
became
in-
available.
increase.
Yeah.
Why was dark chocolate pulled off the market at Trader Joe's and places like that?
This is recent, and there was, I have not studied this properly, but my impression is that there were some questions and concerns about heavy metal contamination. The chocolate production is really quite interesting because there's some Central America, some South America, and the largest cacao producing country is the Ivory Coast in the Central Africa. So there's cacao plants all over, And of course, everybody's saying, ours is the best. Ecuadorians have a proclivity for this, I think. But it appears that there may have been and this is where the sources of their beans came from. They were using Ivory Coast beans and were coming up with high levels of a number of deleterious trace metals, which caused them to pull all of their cacao products were contaminated with this, and they pulled them. That's the extent to my knowledge. I don't know what was going on with this in the, these are trees, and I don't know if they were spraying them with some sort of metal-containing pesticide, or I don't know the extent, what exactly with it. You could probably Google that and look it up. But that was I think what was going on. It was not that there was anything wrong with the cacao in terms of the chocolate part. It was the contamination through the processing and harvest that led in the end to the coffee paste having unacceptably high rare metals. That's my impression right now. Yeah. And that's very unfortunate. So obviously they have to, like everybody else, they have to clean up their production line. I mean, it could have even been in processing where they were adding some addition to the thing. So this is why we do, monitor the quality of these products. It's a good example, actually. Yeah.
Why is Belgian chocolate so much better than American chocolate?
Because they advertise it better. Well, so
Is it better?
no, I'm being joking. Well, so have any of you been to Brussels?
Yeah. Yes.
What's the most common store in Brussels?
I don't know.
Chocolate. It's like you go down and every third, store is a chocolatier. So they have a tremendous and very sophisticated chocolate culture in industry. And so arguably you could say in terms of the refinements and the way that they do things with it, that's very high. Again, this whole idea of bonbons versus the bar is that at there, we'll sit and eat this is a 2.6 ounce. And in Brussels, you'll have maybe a 1 ounce bonbon with your coffee. So it's culturally totally different. And so if you're going to have a large amount, you can't spend a lot of time, putting all sorts of fancy caramels and stuff in it. But if you're going to have those individual one serving, put everything in there and make the quality the highest, that's my theory. But clearly, when I go down the streets of New York City, I don't see every third shop as a chocolatier. And so they're very, very advanced and have been for decades, centuries maybe. So. Yep.
Yeah, I love chocolate, both dark and milk chocolate. But I find the American chocolate is sweeter than European, and sugar is one of the ingredients. How does that affect different things? Yeah.
Well, I think this is kind of where I was getting at is it has to do with what people are used to. And the whole idea is if you're interested in putting into a bar calories, chocolate is a very good way to do that. And if its calories are the goal, then putting some sugar in there. And so I would surmise that maybe, as we made bars for the troops, we added more sugar. We certainly added milk. This is milk chocolate. And so it created a taste for chocolate. But I totally agree with you. I would much rather have that dark Belgian, Swedish, it gives a little, almost a little sourness to it. It's the same melting, it's the same richness. But I think if you think that the American chocolate makers aren't very attuned to the US tastes, we should sit down and chat about that. So it's playing to the market.
Can you talk why the combination of a glass of red wine and dark chocolate is so good for you?
Well, I have some conflict of interest since I own a vineyard, but just it's a pre-statement. Well, what you have is a variety of things going on. You certainly, with the alcohol, you have more of a depressant effect, whereas the chocolate is more of a stimulant effect. But also with red wine in particular, there's a variety of compounds in there, like the flavanols and things, which actually overlap. So I'm not aware of exactly the chemical combinations, but I could very easily see a 1 + 1 = 3 kind of thing with some of those compounds. Particularly with some people will actually, with some alcohol, have a flush, a little bit of a, increased vasodilation, etc. And the chocolate will, so I think there's a variety of stimulant effects from both of them, which probably add to each other. And I would be surprised if they multiply each other. Well, he's a wise cardiologist.
As a tropical crop, is there some threat to production from climate change?
Oh, Lord. Oh, yeah, that's the other thing we did was, well, there's also a variety of diseases that are affected, a variety of molds, and then we'll just go through, you have plantations in Costa Rica or in Ecuador of hundreds of acres of a monoculture, which is, not what we'd like to see if we're environmentally correct, but there's these, and you'll get a disease in there that'll just wipe the whole thing out. There's a broom, there was a, you know what a broom is? It's a growth on a tree. And this was a particular issue that we dealt with. I'm not an agricultural, biologist. I'm interested in some botany once in a while, but this was a huge issue. The productions would go down, and I think at some point they would lose trees. These are trees. This is not a bush that you can grow every year and cut down and grow another one. These are established orchards, basically. What they call them orchards, but so there are, and so all of those things that have occurred with climate change could be affected by climate change, and therefore would have some cataclysmic effects on. So again, there are major cacao growing areas around the world. I think I haven't seen anything relative to, I haven't studied this, but crop yields recently. I think the chocolate market has still been pretty high. There's some people that play with the chocolate market once in a while and raise the price of the beans, but I'm not sure that's been due to climate change. But I guess my point is that all of the kinds of crops that you can think of, citrus and other kinds of things, I would bet that cacao would be prone to climate change.
How important is chocolate economically in trade, you know, say compared to coffee, tea and sugar and things like that?
Well, it depends on I think for the Ivory Coast, it's the #1 export. So it would be huge for that. I think it would be compared to the things you would eat in large amounts like grains and meat and maybe even coffee, it's probably not as important as a gross national product, although I think regionally it would be very much so. In other words, parts of Ecuador, parts of Costa Rica, the equatorial West Africa. And so the Ivory Coast, it would be huge. And the prices of cacao, I think, track with the Ivory Coast crops. So I think it's locally, you know, there are cacao fields and it employs workers and they make a solid, steady living to it. But I'm not sure it would replace I don't think it's quite as dominant as, say, coffee in Brazil or you know, some of the other, you know, large crops. But I think it's significant, but I'm not sure it's overwhelming. Yeah, it's up there.
Just a comment, when you think back to those early slides where the woman in the purple dress was preparing the cacao, that was in Belize, in the south part of Belize, and it was on a Mayan family's farm. And at the end of that process, they would mash the chocolate into a paste. And then they would put that paste in hot water, which would be their beverage. And we were told that they gave that to the entire family, even the children. And that would be a safe alternative to, you know, drinking unboiled water and such. And so this was a daily family habit of drinking that diluted chocolate paste. So if you think back to the comments about the bitter taste, that's what that was, because we were given unsweetened samples and it was so bitter on the palate. And then they provided sugar for us, for the Westerners, and it was quite palatable when sweetened. And they also sent us away with some of this paste wrapped in a palm leaf. So it was a vivid memory of the cacao production in the field.
You see this talk, how many talks do you get with field research? You know, this is.
Pat, did you have a question? Pat, I'm here behind you.
Thank you. I noticed that the Hershey bar you held up was milk chocolate.
Mhm.
And for months, I've tried to get dark chocolate Hershey bars and you can't here locally.
For this talk, I went to everything that sold candy bars in Gainesville. I mean, every place. I could not find a dark chocolate. And I think this is the sequelae of World War II. This is what sold. This is what was in everybody's rations. This then became everybody's lunch pail. And this was the chocolate bar, and us fancy, you know, erudite people are eating this. But the people who want, so I think this has to do with kind of the culture of and where chocolate fits and what people expect chocolate to be. Whereas those of us who have gone to chocolatiers and, ooh, that chocolate there is much better than this chocolate here. Our palates are much different than the, yeah. There's one couple behind you.
I have a question about the aphrodisiac properties of chocolate.
So do I.
Because we did sexual behavior studies, so I was wondering if any scientific studies have been done to to study that aphrodisiac behavior.
Well, there's certainly an association with some of the, the,
Cultural or science?
well, that was that thing about, that was mostly having to do with the perimenstrual things.
Mhm.
But I have not found a definitive study to suggest there's any change in, sexual activity and libido and et cetera. And given its reputation currently, I'm not sure that the chocolate industry wants anything to change. I mean, they may not want to do the research.
Couple, is that okay? Some
Sure,
more
sure,
questions?
sure.
My mother was an avid fan of chocolate. Even at age 4, she'd mix cocoa powder and sugar that she snitched from the kitchen and made a paste of that. She lived to be almost 100 years old.
There you go.
And at her memorial service, we had large boxes of chocolate bonbons in memory of Mother and then giving them good luck in their future life.
There definitely is a cultural, I mean, a lot of foods, the interesting thing of you've done food studies and research is there's a behavioral cultural basis for this that you just can't kind of, and this has been the boon and the bane for many people who want to do interventions on things, even to go from full fat to low fat. I mean, they've run into all sorts of, issues, and so the food industry, like again, this professor of hedonics at Penn State, obviously there's a lot of interest in why we have some of these social and cultural habits, and we hold to them very clearly, and that's why when somebody pulls all of their chocolates because of this this contamination, it's big news, because this is people are interested. People are interested.
Thank you for your wonderful conversation about chocolate, which we all love. And I heard, I think on NPR the other night, that the price of chocolate has skyrocketed just recently because of climate change over in Africa, and in the desert as well. The sands are blowing into the areas where chocolate is grown. And so that's probably why you couldn't find
Well, I
anything.
think the skyrocketing thing has to do with this contamination
Yeah.
prices. So, I mean, so I think your points are valid for the chronic increase in chocolate. This acute thing has
Just
to do with
recently,
this
yeah.
market dent, where there's a huge, the main supplier of chocolates is now not able to distribute their, it's tightened the market up so that the price goes up. Simple economics. But I think you're right. I mean, we've all heard all these, looking at stories of the Salel and the creeping of, and places like, we're talking about the northern halves of those countries used to be Sahara. Now it's more than half the country. Yeah.
Just some good news. I was in Trader Joe's a couple of weeks ago and they had dark chocolate bars.
They went to our friends in Ecuador and we helped them out.
So now one final question that's mine. We've heard, I think we are all convinced that chocolate is good for us, good for our mood, good for cholesterol. So what is the minimum daily requirement? Minimum daily requirement.
I can tell you no one in the Food and Drug Administration has had the courage to look at an RDA. This is like, a lot of kind of things. I think what we say nutritionally would be to work it in to your diet. So for example, if you're not going to have that bowl of ice cream, you can have a nice chocolate. And so I think that's the thing. You know, I guess it's relative to the amount of stimulant. We with all of our Penn State graduate students, wolfing down a half a kilogram of chocolate a day. There was the reason I was at the University of Rochester at the time, and so I was, and Hershey Medical School was further away from State College than I was, so I was their physician overlooking their clinical trials, and this was an issue: will people be having palpitations and there wasn't anything. So if you want to eat more than half a kilo of chocolate, you're on your own. In a variety of ways, you're on your own. But I don't think anybody, again, it's like, how much, there are recommendations for meat and there's recommendations for, other food groups. And I think that's where it's going to be, is it work this in as but there was a movement for a while that this is a full fat food that would raise your cholesterol and should never be part of the diet. It's a food that was bad for you. And I think that's the concept that we attacked on behalf of the chocolate industry, because, you got to have pleasures and maybe we could pick the pleasures that aren't bad for us.
Yeah, but when they say it's bad for you, it's what they put in
It's
the
a
milk
full
chocolate.
fat product.
It's
So
the
if you-
sugar and the fat and everything they put
It's
in
a full,
it. That's right, yeah.
it's calories is the other issue. You're never
Yeah,
going to
right.
get away from that.
Yeah. But-
On the other hand, that's where the quantity comes in. Is that, this will have your calories, but to have these with your afternoon coffee, that's
Right.
just pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. What pleasure. Wonderful talk.